All right there. Hey, data lovers, and welcome to another episode of I Love Data Fridays here at the International Data Evaluation Center on the campuses of The Ohio State University. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 36 of I Love Data Fridays, our annual report of the annual updates to all of our annual reports. And this is the specific episode is relating to changes and to our 2018-19 reports. And let's get right to it. Hey, who's talking data to you today? Well, of course, you've got me, Jeff Breimer-Bashore, Director and Principal Investigator here at the International Data Evaluation Center. And today's episode, when we start talking a little data, is broken into three sections. This first section, we will actually go over what changes have been made for 2018 and 19 in terms of our reports. And this section is designed, our intended audience is our veteran teacher leaders, but new teacher leaders, this is good information for you as well. Veteran teacher leaders, once I'm done with this first section, if you want to bail on the video and go get some other stuff done, that's great. Because the next two sections, my primary audience is for new teacher leaders. Section number 2 will just be an overview of all of the reports that you get from IDEC as a part of your data entry fees that you pay every year. And then the final section, which I've added new for this year, is just an introduction to IDEC data for new teacher leaders. So, once again, first section of this video, the intended audience is our veteran teacher leaders. Once we're done with just the changes to the 2018-19 reports, veteran teacher leaders, if you want to head on out, that's fine. Or you can stick around and listen to the next two sections, the second section being the overview of all of the reports that you get from IDEC, and then an introduction to IDEC data for our new teacher leaders. So let's get it. Let's talk a little data. So let's first talk about our changes to our RR, Reading Recovery, and DLL reports for this year, the 2018-19 school year. And I'm happy to report that there aren't many for this one. And the only change that we have this year for these reports is a new Table 5G, which has been added to our school report. And it specifically reports on the OS total score. And here is a sample of this table. You will see there is one row for each intervention status at a school listed down the left-hand side. Then you will see that the next four columns are the number of students that were used in calculations. So, for example, for discontinued students, 8 students were used in the fall calculation, 13 students were used in entry data calculation, 13 students were used in exit data calculation, and once again, 13 students were used in spring data calculation. And then finally, on the gain, when we look at the gain, 8 students were used to calculate gain data. The next 5 columns show you the mean or average scores at the different points in the year. So once again, if we use our discontinued students, you can see in this sample, the fall mean score was a 401. The fall mean score, or the entry mean score, was a 424. Exit mean score was a 543, and the spring mean score in this report was a 548. And then on average, all students made about 47.6 points gain on the total score. And then finally, the last 5 columns are just the standard deviations of for each points of time. The fall entry, fall entry, exit, and spring, and then once again our standard deviation on our game. So that's actually all the changes for the Reading Recovery and the DLL reports for this year. Let's go into our literacy lessons report changes. There's a few more here. So you're going to find a new table, a revised Table 2.1a. The end of program status categories were revised this year a little bit for literacy lessons, so that table had to be revised. Same for Table 2.1b. Actually, also what's different about Table 2.1a is that reports for students who finished literacy lessons before the end of the school year. Table 2.1b reports end of program status for students who finished literacy lessons around the end of the school year. And once again, there are some new different intervention status, so it's been revised. We have also a new Table 2.1c, and what was Table 2.1c has moved to Table 2.1d. And then figures 2.1a and b report the end of intervention status categories. So once again, since we have some new intervention status categories, those have been updated to reflect the new usage of the end of intervention status categories. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of Table 2.1a. Now, folks, at the time of this recording, we didn't really have any data to show you a completed table with actual real data in it on how the table would look with real data. So I apologize for that, but it's just because things have changed enough that no one has entered data yet. But I'm trying to give you the best look that I can. So here is Table 2.1a. Along the side, left-hand side here, the first two rows will show you the total number of students. It just reports the results for all SPED students and then all ELL students. And it will show you along the top the different intervention statuses, the newer updated intervention status categories. And for each intervention status category, it will show you the number of students, that's the N, and then the percentage of students that fell into that category. So you have your, and then that goes all the way across, and then at the very end you have your total students that fell into that category. And then below, it breaks it down not only by SPED and ELL, but by the grade level within SPED and ELL, just reporting the number and percentages. The percentages will add up across the rows, so they should add up to 100%. Next is Table 2.1b. It looks very similar to Table 2.1a, except it just reports, I think I forgot to say in 2.1a, these are kids who exited from literacy lessons during the school year, prior to the end of the school year. 2.1b focuses on those students that finished literacy lessons at the end of the school year. Once again, it's reporting results for SPED and ELL students by the different end of intervention status categories, as you see across the top here. And then further down the table, it breaks those out by a grade level, or disaggregates them by grade level. Table 2.1c, which is a new one, just reports intervention status by student disability by grade level. So we're looking at just SPED students, and these are specifically also SPED students whose interventions ended at the end of the school year. So just like 2.1b was reporting the intervention status for students who finished literacy lessons at year end, 2.1c is also reporting intervention status for SPED students by disability and grade level for those kids who finish literacy lessons at the end of the school year. So you see the different grade levels by here. Now, once again, like I said, I don't have any data yet in the database, so I can't actually show any real data. But underneath each of these grade levels and all disabilities, it will count up the number of first grade students who had a reported disability. And then below it, even though it's not showing it here, it will show a disaggregated, it will report disaggregatedly by each type of disability reported in your site. So you'll see whether, I'm trying to remember my disability statuses off the top of my head, but I can't do it. But it'll do it for each of those grade levels. So it'll report total first grade counts by intervention status. Then it will have one row for each type of disability and report out the number and percentage of students by each intervention status. All right, that rounds it up for our changes to our annual reports. Veteran teacher leaders, if you feel like you're good for the day, thanks for listening. We'll see you later. For those sticking with us, here we go. We are going to be cranking through a lot of data here, folks. So kind of grab yourself a cup of coffee and let's talk some more data. So new teacher leaders, when you are checking your data and you're ready, your data is done next year, we have a checkout process. So when you go on and log on to the website as a teacher leader, you will see this check and submit button. When you click on that check and submit button, it will take you through a series of steps that checks your data sorted for big errors. And then at the very final step, you say, I'm done. It will signal our reporting system to start running your reports. You'll get an email congratulating you on submitting your data to us, and then you'll get a final email when your reports are ready, which takes about an hour before your reports are ready. So, as a part of your teacher data fees and your site setup fees, this is what you get from IDEC. First, you get a standard set of reading recovery and DLL reports. You only get DLL reports if our system detects if you have DLL data. But what you get are one of the following. You will get, so if you have reading recovery data, you will get a standard site report, a disaggregated report, a site executive summary, the site data dump, the school district report, the school district executive summary, a school summary, and we refer to all these as the annual result packet. And then if you have DLL, you get another set of all of these, of 1 through 7, specifically for DLL. So with your school district reports, you'll get one report for each school district in your site, and for your school reports, you'll get one report for each school in your site. Now, if you have literacy lessons, you will also get a set of literacy lessons reports. So you will get a standard literacy lesson site report, standard literacy lesson school district report, one report for each school district, and a standard school district report, one report for each school, and a literacy lessons site data dump. So now, you may have noticed that I had underlined some of these reports, and you can see I underlined reports 1, 2, 5, and 7. And the reason why I've underlined those reports is because those reports were designed to answer 5 core research questions. How many students were served, and who was served by reading recovery? What was the intervention status of students served by reading recovery, and how many had their series of lessons successfully discontinued? 3, what was the progress of reading recovery students on literacy measures? 4, what proportion of reading recovery students scored in each national achievement group for each measure of the observation survey? And 5, what were the gains from exit to year-end testing of reading recovery students whose lessons began in the fall and were successfully discontinued? I think that should say, what were the gains from fall to year-end for first round reading recovery students? My mistake there. And then each report is designed to answer 3 ancillary questions. What were the changes in reading recovery placement of reading recovery students from the beginning of the year to the end of the year? What percentage of reading recovery students were referred and placed into special education? And what percentage of reading recovery students were considered for retention and retained in first grade? So a total of 8 questions answered by those reports. Now, the good news is that we've tried to, before I get into that, let me just talk about the standard site report. So in the standard site report, there is one section of the report dedicated to each question. So remember how we have 8 total questions here? There is one section for each that's dedicated to answer those questions. So section 1 tables, section 1, if we go back, it's for research question 1, how many students were served and who was served in reading recovery. Those tables are labeled table 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. So research question 1 in section 1, all the tables are labeled 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. In section 2, which answers research question 2, tables are labeled 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, etc. And so on and so forth, just like that. Now, the report actually has 2 parts to it. Part 1 contains all of the standard tables and charts, but it also has some pre-written narrative text inserted around the tables and charts that you can customize if you want to. And then there's a part 2 where the tables and charts are repeated again, all of the tables and charts, but without the narrative text. So, for example, if you were wanting to do some writing about your tables and charts and wanted to use some text that was already there, you can do all of your writing or customized writing in this part 1, but then you can take the part 2 of this report, set it off to a side, and use it as a quick reference if you need to. So the difference being is that on the side is just a blurb from the standard site report, where we're looking at a section where we have the narrative text. So these are reportings figures 2.1 and 2.2. And then we have a sample here without the narrative text from the second part of the report. So you'll see the difference is the narrative text in the center here. It's just missing on the second part of the report. All right, so next is the Reading Recovery Disaggregated Site Report. So the question is, what is the difference between aggregate and disaggregate? So your standard report that you get is actually what we would usually refer to as an aggregate report. So it just reports information by, not by individual groups, but by things as a total, as a whole. So for example, before I get to the example, there's about 104 tables in your disaggregated report, and it has no narrative text. So to show you a quick difference, here is table 2.1 from your standard site report. It happens to show, it reports out some data by school district, and it's looking at the intervention statuses, how many kids were in the different intervention statuses and what the percentage of kids fell into the different intervention statuses. Below it is a disaggregated version of that table, table 2.1.1, and this is showing intervention statuses by race ethnicity. So in this case, it has broken your data down by race ethnicity instead of kind of reporting it for the whole site. These kids are from your entire site, but it's breaking it down by race ethnicity. All right, now in your disaggregated report, you will find disaggregated versions of tables 1.1, 1.2, 2.1, 2.2, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, 3.6. These are tables from your standard report. You will find disaggregated versions of these tables in your disaggregated report. And there are 10 versions of each of these tables in your disaggregated report. So there's 10 disaggregated tables for this report, 10 tables for this report, or for this chart, 10 tables for that, 10 disaggregated tables for that table, 10 disaggregated tables for that table, and 10 disaggregated tables for that table, so on and so forth. For tables 4.1 through 4.6 and 6.1, you will find 2 disaggregated versions for each table. Now, each table, and this is specifically tables 1.1, 1.2, 2.1, 2.2, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, 3.6, they are disaggregated by district, race, ethnicity, gender, school meal cost, oral language proficiency, time of intervention, disability, school locale, minority enrollment, and Title I funding. So those are the 10 versions of those tables that you will find in your disaggregated report. Now, there's a naming convention to all of these tables. So district tables always follow this naming convention of x.y.0. So, for example, if we wanted to see the district disaggregated version of table 1.1, we would go to table 1.1.0. If we wanted to see table 1.1 disaggregated by race ethnicity, we would go to table 1.1.1. And so on and so forth. If we wanted to see table 1.1 disaggregated by gender, we would go to table 1.1.2. All right, so all of the disaggregated tables follow this. If you wanted to see the disaggregated table of 2.1 by gender, you would go to 2.1.2. All right, so that is how your disaggregated table site report is laid out. All right, the next is our reading recovery site and district executive summary. So actually you're getting 2 copies of this. You'll get a site executive summary and a district executive summary for each school district participating into reading recovery. It's a simple 2-page report, and it's meant to be an easy read with some basic information. It is downloaded as a Word document, so you can edit it and change things in there if you need to. All right, and then let's see, as far as the last thing that you get for reading recovery in DLLs, you will get a site data dump. So this is a spreadsheet containing all of the data entered by you and your teachers. There is 1 row for each student served by reading recovery or DLL. Each row contains data about the child's school, the child's teacher, and information about the child and their intervention. And it's about 200 columns wide. Oh, I forgot, we also have our school district summary report. So this report is like our standard report. You get 1 school district summary for each school district in your site. It contains data just for that school district. It just has tables and charts, no narrative text in this, just the tables and charts. It contains a subset of tables that you would find in your site report. So the site report contains about 64 or 65. I believe this one contains about 30 or so tables. Not as many as the site report, but a subset of those tables and charts. And there is, like I said, you'll get 1 school district summary for each school district in your site. And then we have our reading recovery school summary. So now, this one follows, the tables follow a different naming convention. It has the same tables, just a different naming scheme. There's a numerical order to the tables. So they start out with a table 1, a table 2, a table 3, a table 4, and so on. It doesn't follow quite the same naming scheme. Now, these reading recovery summary reports contain data for a school, so you will get 1 report for each school. It is just tables and charts. It contains no narrative text. Like I said, 1 for each school. And just a reminder, these reports need to be kept confidential. They contain student names. You can share them with principals at your school, school literacy teams at your school, but they are not meant to be shared publicly, say at on slides if you're doing a presentation for a school district or for a public. So just remember that these are contain confidential information because they have student names in them. You can also order optional reports. We have what's called a school district annual results packet. That is $75. You get a standard school district report. So remember, it has, and it actually has the same tables as the school district summary. It just has more tables, about a little more than 65 tables in it. And then you can also it comes with also a disaggregated district report. So it's exactly like the site disaggregated report, except it uses data for the school district. And then you get a school district data dump, which is just like the site data dump, except it contains all the data just for a school district. Whew! All right, moving on to our literacy lessons site standard report. So these would look very similar to your reading recovery reports. They've just been modified for literacy lessons, and we've got they have a similar naming scheme: table 1.1, 1.2, 2.1, 3.1 through 3.6. It is just tables and charts, no narrative text. These reports over the last few years have kind of been in a work in progress, so they've been kind of evolving over time, and they may differ, or actually they do differ from last year, as we saw earlier. And they may continue to evolve. Next is a literacy lesson standard district report. It contains the same tables and charts as a literacy lessons site report, except it just uses school district data, and you will get 1 report for each school district. And then you have your literacy lessons standard school report. Once again, the same tables as the school district and as your site literacy lessons report. The tables just use school data, and there is you'll get one literacy lesson standard report for each school. And then finally, you will get your literacy lessons data dump. That is a spreadsheet containing all of the literacy lessons data entered by you and your teachers. There is one row for each student served by literacy lesson, and each row contains data about the child's school, the child's teacher, and about the child and their intervention. All right, now we're getting to our final section here of this I Love Data Fridays, and I'm calling this our introduction to IDEC data for our new teacher leaders. And new teacher leaders. I sometimes think it can be a little intimidating to get into IDEC data, so I kind of want to show you a preferred method to sort of like ease you into the data. We're going to start with some of our on-demand reports. They're like dashboard reports, and they aren't very data dense. They're pretty easy to understand at a glance, and I think they help transition into then going deeper into data if you need to. I typically refer to these as conversation starter reports. So these reports tend to highlight issues or problems, and they kind of make you start asking questions or starting that conversation. And specifically, we're going to look at two examples. We're going to look at the OS scores by schools on-demand report and the student data summary. So now let me bring over a window here. Okay, so here we are. We're on the website. The first thing you're going to do to get your reports is click on the Reports tab. Then you're going to click on On-Demand Reports. This will bring up a new tab, and from here you will select the OS Scores by Schools report. And this will bring up our OS Scores by School on Demand report. Let me quickly explain this report to you. So this report shows the growth of full program students from the start of the school year, that's where the bottom of each bar is at, to the end of the school year, to the top of each bar. And there is one bar for each school. So there's one bar here for each of the schools. The school names are located down at the bottom here. The bars are ordered from left to right, from least amount of growth to most amount of growth, and this is based on the OS total score. And the dashed lines represent the typical growth of RR full program students nationally from the start of the school year to the end of the school year. And then you can see here, it says up at the top here, it says nationally, full program students make about 157 points of growth. And you can see below each of your bars the amount of growth that was made at the schools from the start of the school year to the end of the school year for your full program children. So what I like about this report is it gives you kind of a nice, very quick glance of what's going on at each of your schools. And you can see, for example, we have at this school here, it looks like they really have some students that are coming in pretty low at the start of the school year. So I don't know if this is a student population thing or if it's a kindergarten thing, but this could be a question. Another thing I like about this report, it's kind of a reality check report. So look at this school right here. They certainly have students that come in below what we would normally see a typical reading recovery student come in, and they don't quite make it up to where we see our children finish by the end of the school year. So now this teacher may say, well, my kids are so much harder than everyone else's students. But look at this school right over here, this school. Their students do come in slightly higher, but look at the amount of growth that this teacher is getting out of her students right here. So, this could be sort of a reality check for this teacher. I understand that your kids are hard, but look what's possible and what can we do so you can encourage that amount of growth out of your students. This is also a wonderful chart to show to principals. If you didn't want principals to see the other names of schools, you can take a marker. You can print this off. You can marker out the names of schools, but you can Also do it as like a reality check for your principals and even your reading recovery teachers as well. So I think this is a great conversation starter. If I'm curious. I bet this school has a low hearing and recording sounds and words. If you want to, you can start digging deeper, and you can look at this report by different tasks of the OS. So I'm going to select hearing, recording sounds and words, and I am going to then, after I do that, I'm going to click View Report. It's going to refresh the report. And there we are. There's our Adams. So there we are. Here's our school right here. Man, look at that hearing and recording sounds and words. So maybe they do need a little more better phonics instruction at that school. All right, so that is our on-demand report, the OS scores by school. The next report we're going to look at is our student data summary. And I am going to bring up, if you were to do that on the website, you would click on here and you would actually then click student data summary. I'm going to bring up a sample real quick that already has student names blurred out. It has, this is real data that we're looking at. I had to blur the student names out. Let me give you a second to find it here. All right, here is a sample of our student data summary. So what you are going to see at the top of the screen here, there is one page for each school district on this report. So notice how this one says we're on page 1 of 10. If you click this next button, it will take you, it'll update this report for the next school district. School district names appear right here where I've got this information blurred out. So then it reports results by school and teacher. So the name of the schools appear in this sort of mocha-colored section. The name of the teacher appears right here on this light blue section. For teachers, we're reporting the number of slots that they have, their discontinuing rate, the average number of lessons that they get per week. And then finally, we get to the students actually served by the teacher. So these students have been served by this teacher. The students down here were served by this teacher right here. So for each student, there's one row for each student. For each student, we have the number of lessons, weeks, the number of missed lessons, the number of lessons the child got per week, their text reading level at fall, entry, exit, year end, and then finally their end of intervention status. Now, you're already noticing probably some of the color shading on this report. So this report, when it takes a look at a student's fall data, so not just their text reading level, but all of their fall OS scores. And based on their fall data, we think that this student is more likely to be recommended. And in this case, with this sample data, you can see that our system predicted correctly that we thought these students were going to be recommended, and they actually ended up being recommended. So these students in sort of this pinkish color are more likely to be recommended. And then students who are shaded in this blue, our system, based on their fall data, thinks that they might actually get to a text level in the 16 without intervention. So why do we have this shading? Typically, teacher leaders are busy, right? So we're trying to help you with some like time management. If you really had to put your focus on some of the kids on here, you may want to focus a lot of your attention on how your teachers are doing with the kids that are shaded with this in this pinkish color, the kids that we think that are more likely to be recommended. Because in reading recovery, we're all about beating that prediction. It would have been nice if we could have beat the prediction that these kids actually had discontinued programs instead of recommended programs. And then also the blue kids probably don't need as much of your attention, to see how things are going with the teacher. Are they making that regular acceleration that they should on a weekly basis? So now you can see with the student data summary, this has a little more data to it than the OS scores by school report. But you can this is sort of easing yourself into the IDEC data. It's giving you some summary information. It can help spot some trends and help start some conversations. All right, so when you're ready to have further and deeper conversations about your data, it's good then to actually start digging into your annual reports. And now we're not going to go table by table. I'm just going to show you a few tables that have been recommended by other teacher leaders that are sort of good places to start, that when you get your report for the first time at the end of the school year, you can sort of take the temperature of your site and get a sense on how things are going. So now a recommendation that I'm going to make here, as you go through your data, I think it's good to have a copy of the national report with you to give you a sense of what's happening nationally and be able to compare your data to the national data. It helps give you a sense of sort of like, what's typical, what's normal, what's expected. So if you go to our public website, www.idecweb.us, click on publications, and then you can download the latest Reading Recovery National Summary Report. I'm going to download that. This report has the same, it labels the tables the same way. So if you're looking at table 1.1, you can look at table 1.1 in the national report as well. All right, so you don't have to go hunting any extra places for tables. All right, I'm going to minimize that. Let's move to our next screen here. So, some teacher leaders have recommended that you start with tables 2.3, 2.4. Specifically, these tables look at weeks and lessons that students are getting and comparing students who successfully discontinued and students who were incomplete. This teacher leader happened to say in our district the number of weeks are very close. These led to questions about acceleration and how close are these students to exiting successfully? Are we keeping first down round students too long, etc.? So let's take a look at table 2.3 and 2.4. Here is an example of table 2.3, weeks and sessions of reading recovery instruction. So the first few rows here are data about weeks. The last few rows are data about sessions. And then we have one column for our discontinued children, recommended children, our incomplete children, our moved children, and our none of above children. In statistics, the number N, the letter N, is used to represent it's how many kids or how many were used in this calculation. So for discontinued students, 686 children were used in the calculation of, say, the mean, 14.5, which it happens to be. So, on average, the mean, on average, the same as saying on average, our discontinued children were getting about 14 and a half weeks of instruction. Our recommended kids were 20. That's not really a surprise. Incomplete kids were getting about 13.4 weeks of instruction. And none of above about 30. Well, let's look at our recommended and incompletes. 14.5, 13.4. Jeff, what's the difference between the median and the mean? And why should I care? So the mean, which is also called the arithmetic mean, the difference is that to figure out the mean, our system adds up all of the weeks that your kids have got, adds up all their weeks and then divides it by the number of kids used in the calculation. In this case, for discontinued kids, we added up all their weeks and then you divide it by 686. It's a mathematical computation. The median means you take all of the weeks that your children got and you put them in numerical order from least amount of weeks to most amount of weeks, and you pick the middle week out of the bunch. Which number falls right in the middle? And in this case, it was 16. When do I use one over the other? The median is a little more resistant to outliers. So if you have one kid that's like got a lot of weeks it's more resistant. I'll just say it like that. It's more resistance to outliers. Data points that are at the extremes. In this case, the median, I don't think there was an outlier. This was kind of a big number of weeks, a maximum number of weeks for kids to be discontinued, but it's not a huge outlier. I'll just leave it at that. The median tends to be a little more resistant to outliers. And it's also a little, sometimes when you have small number of n's, it's better to use the median than the mean. But in any case, for these, it's okay. If you're unsure which one to use, it's fine. Just use the mean. You'll be just fine. All right, so let's look at weeks real quick. So discontinued kids on average, once again, 686 kids were used in the computation. They had a mean of about, I'm sorry, these are lessons. They got about 52.1 lessons. Our incomplete kids got about 49.1. So now remember, I said we could compare this to the national data. So let's look at national data 2.3. Find table 2.3. There it goes. Unfortunately, it split across the page. But let's see, nationally, our discontinued children were going about 15.7 weeks. And here in this example, they were doing about 14.5. So they're actually moving their kids faster. They're getting them discontinued faster. Their incomplete kids did about 13.4. Nationally, the average is about 13.1. So there you go. You can do some quick comparisons and give your sense, how close am I to the national average of things. All right. Let's move on to our next table, table 2.4. So the intervention status, we're looking at intervention status by number of weeks in the intervention. So along the weeks, along the left-hand side, you'll see the number of weeks that a child would be in an intervention, and then we have our intervention statuses along the top. So for example, 30 discontinued students had an intervention that was between 1 to 4 weeks. 81 discontinued students had an intervention that lasted 5 to 9 weeks. 176 students had an intervention that lasted 10 to 14, and 301 had an intervention that lasted 15 to 19 weeks, and so on down the row. And we had two sort of little outliers out here with a 22 and a 23-week intervention. And then the percentages should add up vertically down the columns. All right? So we had, let's go to incompletes. Incompletes, we had 11 kids, 1 to 4, 17 kids, 5 to 9, 53, 10 to 14, 10 to 14, 81, 15 to 19. Let's look at this nationally. Scroll down to table 2.4. So the majority of the kids nationally get somewhere between, they 10 to 14, 15 to 19, and 20 weeks with a few outliers in the bigger areas. So I don't think their table 2.4 was too much different. 26, 44, 14, 32, 34, 32, 25. I mean, a little different, but the majority of the kids were in this 10, 14, 15, 19 to 20 weeks range. Okay. Let's look at our next table. Table 5.2. So this should look familiar. It should look a lot like table 2.3, except this is weeks and sessions of reading recovery kids who got whose interventions started in the fall. Our first round kids. All right, so we're looking at our first round kids. So let's look at the weeks. We had 306 kids used in this calculation, and on average, they were getting 16.7 weeks of lessons. Nationally, let's see, table 5.2. Nationally, 18.5. I mean, they are really, so these kids are, they're really moving kids. Their first round kids out of reading recovery. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. All right. Let's go back to our data. About 61 lessons. So that is table 5.2. Give you a sense of how your hardest to teach your first round kids are doing, and you can compare that to our national data. And then figure 5.1 on your SAT report is another one that's good to look at. It can help try to answer this question: are we closing the gap, and specifically gap on text reading level? Maybe we have a high discontinuing rate, but are we actually closing the gap on text reading level? So here is, oops, let me go back, sorry. Got the wrong things up here. This one, boom. Here's an example of figure 5.1. It is showing text reading level at the beginning of the school year, at the middle of the school, well, at the end of the school year, and at the year end. Technically, it's entry, exit, year end, but these are first round children. Interventions begun in the fall, and specifically, we're looking at discontinued children. So the blue line is our first round discontinued children, and the red line is the national random sample. So you can look that our reading recovery kids in this sample start down, pretty low, our random sample, and they exit, but they don't quite, in this sample data, they don't quite catch up to our random sample kids. And then the gap actually even widens a little bit more by the end of the school year. Let's take a look. Oh, here's another figure 5.1 from someone else's data. Once again, the blue line is first round discontinued, and the red line is our national random sample. Now you can see in this report that the first round kids catch up to the random sample, but then they kind of slide off here, and a little gap forms between those students. So kind of two scenarios of data where there's a gap. One where there's a gap at both time points, and then another one where there's a gap. We close it at the middle of the school year, but it opens back up a little bit. What's that look like nationally? Let's take a look. It's a little. This table's got a little more in it, but it's. Let's see. The blue line is our first round discontinued, and in this one, the national random sample is the green line here with the circles. So you can see nationally. Once again, we start low, we catch up, and then we finish a 20.2 versus a 19.8. So a slight gap, slight drop with kids. Not much of a gap, but they pretty much stay with the random sample there. All right, let's go look at our next data. Table S25. So table S25, oh, I forgot to say what is table S25. I think this is second round kids. Let's look at the national report real quick. Find table table S25. Let's see, weeks whose intervention started around the mid-year. So yes, this is data, weeks and lessons for kids who started the second round kids who started their interventions at the middle of the school year. So in this sample, their lessons lasted about 14.8 weeks. The incomplete kids in the second round were going about 15.1. Interesting. More time. These kids are getting in reading recovery longer, but they aren't getting discontinued. Let's look at how many lessons. Discontinued kids were getting about 15 lessons, and the incomplete kids were getting about 54, almost 55 lessons. So very interesting. I think there's an interesting conversation there. Let's go look at the national data. On average, nationally, it's about 14 and 14.1 weeks. So go back to that data, 14.8 and 15.1. So they're taking a little longer to work with their second round kids, and normally what we see. But you know what? This is their first round data. They were getting their kids out really fast. That was incredible. In fact, they're having second round recommended kids. Wow, sounds like they're able to actually get kids in the second round with a full 20 weeks intervention. I'm probably getting a little sidetracked here with this data, but you can see how I'm starting to analyze it here and compare it to the national data. So some definite questions here with data, and this is good. The next data is table S26, and I do believe this is third round children. Let's just go down one table here. S26 nationally, whose intervention started near year end. Yeah, our third round children. So 9 and about 8 weeks of time left. And they were getting about 5, almost 6, and almost 6 at this point in there. So there you go. Oh, there's another table, table 2.2. So this shows you the percentage of kids So the percentage of full program children, all right, we're looking at full program children. And out of the full program children, shows you how many were discontinued, which is 85% in this sample, and 15% recommended. And once again, you can go to your national report, look up figure 2.2, and compare it to the national results, which is 70 and 30. And then we have table 3.7, which is the growth on the OS total score from the start of the school year to the end of the school year by different student groups. So we have different student groups down the long left-hand side here: discontinued, recommended, incomplete, all children who were served, completed interventions are full program children, and then any random sample or tested not instructed students in your data. And then their fall scores are here. So once again, remember N is how many kids were used in the calculation. And then you'll find the mean or the average score, and then a standard deviation. So and then you find the year-end scores. So how many kids were used in the calculation, the average score, and the standard deviation. And then finally, we report the gain. How many kids were used in the calculation of the average gain, and then finally the average amount of gain that they made. So discontinued children, on average, in this site started at a 391.3 on the total score. By the end of the school year, they were at a 547.8 on the total score and had an average gain of 156.6. So there's an example of table 3.7. Whew! All right, folks, that was a lot of data there. And I just want to say thank you for sticking with me and listening through all of this if you made it to the end. Let me cue the outro music here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching another episode of I Love Data Fridays. And hey, we will talk data to you later.